First tonight to some breaking news. U.S. media reports say the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz is leaving his post. Mr. Waltz has been the focus of controversy since a journalist was mistakenly added to a group chat on the Signal app discussing plans to attack the Houthis in Yemen. President Trump, who is speaking at the moment, is expected to confirm Mr. Waltz's departure soon. Mr. Waltz has been a lot less publicly visible over the last few weeks, having gone from a position of the highest profile levels for the Trump administration. It's not clear yet who might be a contender for his replacement, and we'll bring you more on that story as it unfolds. Now let's return to our top story tonight. After months of political wrangling, the United States has signed a deal with Ukraine on the joint exploitation of its energy and mineral resources. The two countries have agreed to establish a reconstruction investment fund to ensure Ukraine's economic recovery. The U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said it showed that both sides were committed to lasting peace and prosperity in Ukraine. Kyiv will in effect be giving Washington access to some of Ukraine's natural resources in return for future U.S. security assistance. But analysts say that is significantly less than Mr. Trump wanted, which was to get paid back for all U.S. military assistance given since the start of the war. The signing was announced by a press release emailed out from the U.S. Treasury, a far cry from the fanfare originally intended for a ceremony at the White House in February, which ended in acrimony with the Oval Office bust up between Presidents Trump and Zelensky. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Russia have made different claims about a Ukrainian drone strike in a small town occupied in the Kherson region. A proxy Russian official said at least 7 civilians were killed at a market in Oleshki, but Ukraine says military personnel were hit, publishing video that shows a strike on 4 people dressed in black. Elsewhere, officials in the Ukrainian city of Odessa say at least 2 people were killed and 5 others wounded in an overnight Russian drone strike. The regional governor said the attack damaged residential buildings and a school, adding that fires had broken out in some areas. Drone attacks were also reported in the eastern city of Kharkiv. Well, for more on these developments, let's cross over to London and speak to the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Dr. Laskiewicz, as always, great to see you again. Let's start with those developments out of Ukraine. That deal, of course, after months of deliberations, that minerals deal has finally been signed, and it'll give the U.S. access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals, won't it?
Yes, and that's about all it will do. It's an extraordinary win for Ukraine, really. USA's got nothing much. It's got access to the minerals, especially the rare earths, which is why it signed the deal. However, Ukraine has agreed to nothing as far as one can see. There will be no payback of the money that USA gave it or donated to it previously, which is strictly speaking correct, because of course it was always supposed to be a donation, but it's not what Donald Trump wanted. There's no recognition by Ukraine of any territory lost de jure, and possibly only de facto recognition, which is certainly not what Donald Trump wanted. And to add to it all, even when they do get their hands on the rare earths, there will be no money for USA for 10 years, because initially all the funds will go to rebuilding Ukraine. So therefore, it's one gigantic donation, really, by the USA to Ukraine, including, of course, the fact it will continue to give military aid. It is genuinely very hard to see what Donald Trump's going to now be offering Russia in return, because it's quite clear Ukraine has kept to its red lines.
Well, it's very interesting, your assessment, because it rather gels with what the Democrats are saying in their criticism of that deal. They say it's a movie that's all been seen before. First, Mr. Trump makes what they called crazy demands. Then he settles for the most vague and inconsequential agreement. And then he announces that he's the best negotiator in the history of the universe. But they say that this deal will never turn out to be economically significant to the US. And that is your assessment of that assessment.
Yes, I would just make some minor riders, put some minor riders on that. First of all, there is one key aspect for USA, which is probably by Donald Trump's side, is to get his hands on the rare earths because of the trade war with China. However, there's a second rider, which is quite deadly. He now appears as a somewhat weak figure, having made very, very strong demands. The world was just about getting used to this, and we're waiting to see what's going to happen when he settles, as indeed the Democrats have said, for a treaty which by no stretch of the imagination meets anything that he really wanted. And if he comes across as a weak figure who's going to settle like that, then clearly in Russian eyes, and indeed Iran's and China's, and North Korea's come to that, he's not the man that everyone's been expecting, and therefore he's going to make it's a knock really to USA prestige, to his prestige, and to his ability to get things done the way America wants.
And of course, the Democrats, who, let's face it, are still smarting from their loss to President Trump, but they suggest further that the only significance of this deal is that it is a chance for Donald Trump to go to a rally and say that Joe Biden's an idiot because he never negotiated this deal, and that he, Donald Trump, forced Zelensky into abject submission in a demonstration of Trump's total power, and that he's secured something wonderful.
Well, indeed, one expects, of course, President Donald Trump, like all politicians, to sell his deal as best he can. But it's quite clear that, I think, to everybody, that is not the deal that he wanted. And in this respect, I honestly doubt that his bragging, assuming that's what he does, will actually be successful. The problem is too many people have seen that he's now got feet of clay, added to which, of course, one of his staff is leaving, which doesn't help him. And therefore, on the contrary, what has come out of this is that USA, yes, it has is no longer, if you like, the ally without limits for Ukraine. But on the other hand, it is prepared to settle for things which it said it would not. Therefore, I don't think President Donald Trump is going to be able to sell it in the way that the Democrats assume.
But I mean, in terms of the diplomatic relations between the US and Ukraine, I mean, keeping in mind that acrimonious meeting at the White House in February, does this deal make it easier for the two countries and their leaders to deal with each other?
Yes, well, in effect, in many ways, President Zelensky has won. Okay, Donald Trump shouted at him a bit, but now he signed a deal which actually was not a good deal or superb deal for USA by any stretch of the imagination. So I think, yes, it's quite clear that USA and Ukraine will be working together more closely. Yes, I think it means quite clearly that USA will provide some sort of military assistance and carry on doing so to Ukraine. But by the same token, this means that any sort of treaty now, negotiating with Russia is going to be very hard because he has nothing much to offer the Russians in that sense. On the basis of this minerals treaty, he's shown that basically he's staying on Ukraine's side to some extent. So therefore, I don't think in terms of the war, it's going to be that significant one because he's not forced Ukraine to agree to anything they don't want to.
Well, let me push you a little bit further on that, because as you said, this deal comes as talks between Washington and Moscow over a possible peace deal in Ukraine continue. And I'm wondering how this minerals agreement, just expanding further what you said just a minute ago, is likely to affect those talks. I mean, is it a bad day for Mr. Putin?
Not so much a bad day, but certainly the deal between USA and Russia is now going to be muted for two reasons. First of all, it's clear Ukraine is not going to recognize de jure any aspect of its territory from 2014 being now in Russian hands. And secondly, Donald Trump doesn't need Russian rare earths and Russian resources, and therefore, as a result, the harmony between them to that extent is now muted. Rather, also, it does show that if Donald Trump is prepared to accept things, unfortunately, there's a third conclusion, that Russia can carry on as before, quite possibly, even if it were to sign a treaty about Ukraine, it would be more on the lines of a truce, because America has shown that it's just not prepared to be that strong country dictating terms, which it threatened to be, or rather promised to be, some time back. And therefore, I anticipate this, in terms of the war, of not being very good, because A, the Ukraine war could continue, and B, Russia could expand to areas, as I've indicated before, such as in my book, especially about the Suwalki corridor in Poland. And also, I repeat, for Iran, North Korea, and for China, suddenly it turns out President Donald Trump, after all this bluster, is just doing that, blustering. It's not a good day for America. So from that point of view, for President Putin, it's not as bad as you suggested.
Dr. Laskiewicz, thank you ever so much. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the international affairs analyst. He was talking to me on the line from London.